Welcome to worship at Reedwood Friends Church meeting. Welcome to people online. We've gotten through at least some of the ice and snow of the winter, and it's good to see people here. I've been thinking a lot about gifts since the Christmas season and haven't had time to process all that thinking, but the good news is the Magi have made it home. I did some calculating, and the Magi lived about 900 to 1,000 miles from Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And if they were on camels, as often we see on pictures, a camel can walk about 22 miles a day. So if you multiply or divide 22 into 1,000 or so, you got 45 days. So today they've arrived home. And I'm glad that happened. But their gifts are interesting to me. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I was thinking about this at Christmas time because what were all the TV ads? It was about jewelry, diamonds and gold you give to your loved ones. Perfume, I don't see perfume ads except during Christmas, and have all of these perfumes that cost $100 a bottle. And then myrrh, which I looked up as an embalming fluid. I guess they don't advertise that at Christmas time. And I was thinking about how difficult it is for me to buy gifts for my family and for friends, because you try to match the gift to the individual. And that takes a lot of work, frankly. And so I wondered about the wise men. I don't know if there are 3 or 1 or 2, but they must have gone through some kind of a similar project, trying to think, now what am I going to give the Christ child? Gold for the king, or frankincense, which is about $6,000 now per ounce, I guess, or myrrh, the essential oil that they used in embalming. So they came up with those 3 and gave, and eventually what we've done in my family is given up giving gifts. It's too stressful, and just give cash. That's easier, and thus they can use it. Well, relating that to our own gifts for Christ, I think, what gifts do I bring to the Christ child? And I'll talk a little bit more about this in monthly meeting, but I think of 1 Corinthians 12, and it talks about the gifts that we each have, that we bring. And you know that long list, everything from wisdom to discernment to teaching, preaching, all those long list of gifts that we bring. So each of us, it says in 1 Corinthians, are given by God these gifts to share. And each of us have them. Don't ever think that God didn't give you a gift that you can't share with the community that honors him. And so as we reflect on this season of post-Christmas and the gifts that we bring, think about what your gifts are and how you can give those to Christ via the community. So let's open our time of worship with prayer. Once again, Creator God, Lord in Christ, we think of this time where we give worth to you, and we want to do that year-round. May we reflect on the gifts that we bring to you. That some of us have these gifts of discernment, some of wisdom, some of prophecy, and may we be aware of what we can bring to the Christ child. Thank you for an opportunity to be in community, loving one another in you. Amen.
Teach me to stop and listen. Teach me to center down. Teach me the use of silence. Teach me where peace is found. Teach me to hear your calling. Teach me to search your word. Teach me to hear in silence things I have never heard. Teach me to be collected. Teach me to be in tune. Teach me to be directed. Silence will end so soon. Then when it's time for moving, grant it that I may bring to every day and moment peace from a silent spring. Teach me to be collected. Teach me to be in tune. Teach me to be directed. Silence will end so soon. Then when it's time for moving, grant it that I may bring to every day and moment peace from a silent spring. Be thou my vision, O love of my heart, not be all else to us save that thou art. Thou art best thought by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence our light. Be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word. We ever with thee, and thou with us, Lord. Thou art creator, thy light our sun. Thou in us dwelling, and we with thee one. Riches we heed not, nor earth's empty praise. Thou our inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou only, first in our heart. High God of heaven, our treasure thou art. Deep source of power, fulfill what's begun. May we reach heaven's joys, O bright heaven's sun. Heart of our own hearts, whatever befall, still be our vision, O ruler of all.
Good morning. This is the story of the scattered seed. He went back to teaching by the sea. A crowd built up to such a great size that he had to go into the offshore boat, using the boat as a pulpit as the people pushed to the water's edge. He taught by using stories, many stories. Listen, what do you make of this? A farmer planted seed, and as he scattered the seed, some of it fell on the road, and the birds ate it. Some of it fell in the gravel. It sprouted quickly, but it didn't put down roots. So then the sun came up, and it withered away just as quickly. Some fell in the weeds. As it came up, it was strangled among the weeds, and nothing came of it. Some fell on good earth, and came up with a flourish, producing a harvest, exceeding his wildest dreams. Are you listening to this? Really listening? When they were off by themselves, those who were close to him, along with the 12, asked about the stories. He told them, "You've been giving insight into God's kingdom. You know how this works. But to those who can't see it just yet, everything comes in stories, creating readiness, nudging them towards a welcome awakening. These are the people whose eyes are open but don't see a thing, whose ears are open but don't understand a word, who avoid making an about face and getting forgiven." He continued, "Do you see how this story works? All of my stories work this way. The farmer plants the word. Some people are like the seed that falls on hardened soil of the road. No sooner do they hear the word than Satan snatches away what he has planted in them. And some of them are like the seed that lands on gravel. When they first hear the word, they respond with great enthusiasm. But there is such a shallow soil of character that when the emotions wear off and some difficulty arrives, there is nothing to show for it. The seed cast in the weed represents the ones who hear the kingdom news but are overwhelmed with worries about all the things they have to do and all the things they want to get. The stress strangles out what they have heard, and nothing comes of it. But the seed planted in the good earth represents those who hear the word, embrace it, and produce a harvest beyond their wildest dreams.
Thank you, my love, for that reading. A familiar story. Whoa, that was pretty loud. A familiar story. We all know that. Maybe we know it by another name, the parable of the sower. The sower. I know for a long time I thought they were talking about sowing. Until last week, I realized they were talking about something else. No. A wonderful parable. And it's a parable about growing things. Growing things. It's a parable about the season that we're moving into. You know, I was so surprised. Just yesterday, Brenna and I were walking down Hawthorne, and I looked down, and not just the beginnings, a full bloom of patches of crocuses along the sidewalk. And I'm like, it's January 27th, and this is happening. But it was, kind of brought to mind this idea of growing things. With growing season just around the corner, spring is literally begins Tuesday, March 19th this year, at 11:06 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's when spring comes. And it's, that fits into this text about spreading seed, about growing things. And I don't know if you've noticed as well, the marketing kind of hops on the wagon of these growing things. Anytime you go into Fred Meyer or Target or Home Depot, strategically placed in your line of vision are those tall, colorful, swiveling display cases of seed packets, just calling out for your name. It's time to plant the garden again, and come and buy our seed packets. Interesting what you see here. Even when you end up, I end up finding connections to these parables whenever I even go shopping. You can't help but see it. I love that the Bible offers some perspectives, though, about how we can think of God. That's kind of the front door thing that I see in this parable. It offers a new vision and a different way of perceiving and looking at God. In this story, it doesn't cast God as a cosmic monarch in that mold that's so often referred to in the Psalms as, God is a king and ruling the cosmos and ruling the universe with justice and equity. We don't see that in this parable. There's a different vision of God. Nor does Jesus portray God as a patriarch. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That's not presented in the story either. Another vision of God is presented in this story where God is understood to be whom in this parable, and it can be interactive. Who's God in the parable? The farmer, the sower. He's the one, kind of being haphazardly sowing seed over the ground. God is the farmer. And such a portrait of God being a farmer, an agriculturalist, is special because it should stir our memory. All right, where else was God a farmer? Well, I know that God was a gardener way back at the beginning of the Bible when he planted the Garden of Eden. In the beginning of Genesis 1:1, God is presented not so much as a cosmic monarch or a patriarch, but a gardener. Isn't that interesting? Interesting perspectives on how we see God. The farmer then planting his seeds and walking about and sowing what, according to the story goes, the word or the ways of God, the grace of God. And we also must remember that images of God in themselves are very telling in what they communicate about what are God's values and what is God's heart for us to understand. And understanding God then as a farmer or a sower or a gardener, even if we've never been on a farm before, a farmer's vocation could be seen as doing really one thing really well. What's the job of an agricultural farmer? The job of an agricultural farmer is to create the conditions for life to grow things. That's the job of a farmer. To allow things to get growing and allow things to grow into a harvest, to allow things to take root and to flourish. That is this vision that we have of God, both in Genesis and in particular in Mark chapter 4, in the parable of God as the farmer, or the four seeds, or the four soils. Today's reading is a parable about the hope of God flourishing. And if we are to understand this parable literally, the hope of God, it says that the life of God has kind of a small margin to grow deep roots. And when it takes root in the good earth, there is a yield of surplus that makes up for the loss of the other seeds that were lost to the other elements as were presented in the story. And yet, whenever we read this story, we kind of listen in and, we consider this story yet again. I'm sure that we're familiar with this one. This is not the only lesson that is embedded in this parable. I want us to look at another thing. And I have a question for you. Have you ever heard of the word terraforming? Terraforming. What terraforming literally means is earth shaping, to shape the earth, to shape how the earth can be constructed and can move and allow things to flourish. The Pacific Northwest's, keeping this idea of terraforming in mind, the Pacific Northwest's foremost science fiction writer, Frank Herbert, was the author of the Dune book series. I don't know, maybe some of you have read it, maybe some of you have heard it, Maybe this is completely new to you. But Frank Herbert was from Tacoma, Washington. He was born and raised there. And he wrote this book series called Dune, and it's a sci-fi story about a planet known as that namesake, Dune, or if you want to get technical, it's Arrakis. And if you don't know anything about this story, you need to know that the climate of Dune is what could be considered ultra-arid. It's an ultra-dry place. And maybe you're a little bit more familiar with the movies. They came out with a movie of Dune in the 1980s. You know, it's kind of like a cult classic right now. And now, recently, they came out with a new version of it about 2 years ago, part 1. Part 2 comes out March 1st, and we just bought tickets 2 days ago for it. So we can't wait to watch that. Yes, we've read it. We've read the story as well, so we know where it's going. But, you know, this ultra-arid climate of Dune, the word, I don't know if it's just kind of local legend, that Herbert actually went to Florence, and the dunes in Florence, Oregon, inspired this vision of Dune or Arrakis. But the climate of Dune is dry, to say the least. So much so that for humans to live on this science fiction planet, they have to wear engineered bodysuits that capture, distill, and recycles the moisture secreted from the characters' bodies. They can't even lose their sweat, or they won't last long at all. The fictional planet is a hostile environment with gigantic sandworms, indigenous freedom-fighting Fremen, and the location of a precious substance that's only found on Dune, in the Dune universe, that's simply referred to as spice. That's the place where you go to get this spice. That in that universe and in that book, that's really very, very important. It's this spice that occupying humans are there to harvest and process for their use. Within that harvesting and processing, there is exploitation of the Fremen people. However, the dream of the original indigenous human occupants of Dune, the Fremen, is simple. They want something else. They don't really care. They're not too worried about spice, like the rest of the Dune universe. That's what they're after. They don't really worry about that. What the Fremen want is to make the planet habitable for human occupation and flourishing. That is, they want to terraform it with the most precious substance next to spice. They want to terraform Dune with water. That's the big picture in the story. That's the long narrative over the series of books that Herbert eventually writes. And I believe there's maybe close to 10 books in that saga. It is a massive body and a massive work. The dream of the Fremen, though, is a green, lush garden planet instead of the harsh, hostile planet that it presently is. That's the big picture. To bring a place of inhospitality, to bring a planet of danger, to bring a planet where human life could not possibly exist without a still suit, and bring it into a place of flourishing. Much like this fictional storyline of Frank Herbert's Dune saga, the deep beauty and function of the parables is to create a spark of imagination and possibility. The parable helps challenge and encourage its hearers to visualize what they would like to identify with in the parable. Jesus talks about a number of things that can distract, and he names a number of things that distract or remove us from a place of flourishing. And sometimes the things that distract us and remove us from the life of God, he would say, is almost like it's self-sabotage. It's as if things are stolen away from us. Other times we choose self-preservation over faithfulness. And those are the things that steal away the life of God from us. And at other times it looks like we're so overwhelmed by the worries and anxieties of this life, we miss the present life of God active and aware in our lives. So there are these kind of challenges that we face. There are these habits that we ingrain in our lives that tend to steal away what God is trying to freely give all of us. Much like what I was sharing about with the Dune narrative. I didn't want to get too far away from that. What I was sharing about the Dune narrative is that reading in between the lines is the call to, in a sense, let's use our imagination, to terraform our life, to change our life in such a way so as to bring a flourishing life of God within how we live and what we do. To, in a sense, change the landscape if what you're doing is keeping you from experiencing joy and life in the Holy Spirit. You know, sometimes we can kind of trudge our way through life. We can go through life without kind of experiencing any sort of spiritual connection to ourselves or a spiritual connection to God or with one another. Well, what do we need to do to change that? Something is being stolen. Something is being short-circuited. What do I need to do to change that? How do I need to creatively terraform my heart, my life, for the sake of receiving and for the sake of flourishing? We often don't like to hear, in my experience, we often don't like to hear a direct approach when it comes to hearing the truth about ourselves, especially not the pleasant truths about ourselves that we like to hear. It's kind of like, it's music to our ears when people tell us about what we already know about ourselves that we like. It's a little bit harder when we hear things about ourselves from others that we may be in denial about. Or we may not like to hear about ourselves. For example, whenever someone tells us the truth about ourselves, what do? We can get defensive. We often run to excuses for ourselves, and we even live in a state of denial about who we are. That's kind of our natural kind of reactiveness to some people that may be telling the truth about us. The parable offers a way to address the human responses to the seed of God and helps us understand ourselves with a level of introspection and reflection. The story itself is the vehicle for what we often need to hear about ourselves. It's a way for Jesus to tell through the crowds something that he desperately wants people to hear about themselves, but he can't necessarily go through the front door by saying it. So he creates a story. And in the story, you have the choice to kind of introspect and think about, okay, which seed do I want to be? Do I want to be the one that's choked out by the worries of the world? Is that me? Well, maybe. Do I want to be the seed that has what's been given stolen away by birds? Christ says, or Satan? That's not what I want to be. Do I want to be the seed that is sown into the earth, and after a little while I'm happy about it, but if I have to suffer for it, or something that is precious or is loved by me is asked of me, then I will abandon it? Am I a shallow person? How can I deal with that? Here is the beauty of Quaker spirituality, I believe, concerning this idea of seeds, the seed of God. Quaker spirituality, would affirm the innate implanted seed of God within each and every one of us. It's already there. We don't have to wait for it. We don't have to ask for it. It's in you. It's in all of us. The potential to grow the life of God is already present in each person, and a gift of God's grace and goodness. However, This seed of God is sown, strangely, in vulnerability. This seed of God is tender, is fragile, is precious, and it needs patience and ultimately faith to allow it to grow. Last week, I decided to walk through our hallway of light and check out our photographs and our quotes that help inspire some thoughts in the looking at the photographs. And I came across this quote that I read it and I thought, now that sounds a lot like what Jesus is talking about in this parable of the seed. It's a quote by Elizabeth Bathurst. And Elizabeth Bathurst says this, or writes this, and she wrote this back in the 1600s. She wrote, "The seed, or the grace of God, is small in its first appearance, even as the morning light. But as it is given heed to, as it is obeyed, it will increase in brightness till it shine in the soul like the sun in the firmament at its noonday height." Elizabeth Bathurst. Talking about this vulnerable state of the seed of God within each and every one of us, and how it is our task as spiritual people and as human people to nurture this seed and allow it to grow. So whenever we hear and see the parable of Jesus and we hear that, well, if I'm too occupied with the worries and anxieties of this world, and I'm always focused upon that, that's keeping the seed of God from growing. It's choking it out, so to speak. Or if I'm afraid to suffer for a witness, aligning my life to the teachings of Christ and God, if I don't want to suffer for that, then that too will choke it out. Or if I allow myself to kind of be a self-sabotaging person where everything else is kind of somebody else's fault and I take no responsibility for my own life, that too can choke out the seed of God. But then it says that there is a seed that can grow deeply in a soil that is well planted, that it's planted in. I like how Eugene Peterson translated, it's deeply planted in the good earth. And the hearers of that parable want themselves, we naturally want to say, I want to be that good earth. What do I need to change to become that? What does that change look like? What does it look like to be a person where the seed of God grows in the good earth, the good soil of my life? Maybe, just maybe, it looks like a deeper level of self-acceptance and forgiveness of yourself. Maybe that's what it looks like. Maybe for the seed of God to take root and grow deeply in your life and to sprout a harvest in your life, it looks like a life that considers what the will of God for your life looks like in the present time. For a lot of us, I know that sometimes the seed of God growing deep roots into our lives is not doing it by ourselves, but it's simply coming to a place where you ask for help, asking for community to take place in your life, coming to a point in your life where you say you are open and ready for what God wants us to do. To consider God's life, to consider God's light and perspective. That's what it is that Christ is talking about. And to manipulate and change our life in such a way where we can encourage a flourishing of the Spirit of God and the life of God within us. I wonder if sometimes if preparing the soil of our hearts and the soil of our lives is even in this time that we take for open worship, for observing silence, and allowing the still small voice of God to then speak directly to us. I have to wonder if that's what's happening, and that's why we return there and honor that. It's a way of allowing and turning to the life of God, the seed of God, to grow in depth and in soil, the soil of our life. Why don't we take some time then and center down and consider what the word of the Spirit may speak to us about this parable. Consider what the Spirit of God may be speaking to us today about something in our lives that He wants to touch. Why don't we go ahead and take a few moments, friends, and center down. If you feel so moved to share in vocal ministry, Suzanne has a microphone. Friends online, if you feel moved to share in vocal ministry, please unmute yourself so we can hear you. Let's center down, friends.